Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. It is Saturday. That means we're going to check out a full album, and today, as you probably saw in the title of the video, we're going to be looking at Kardashev's Liminal Rites, which I'm pretty stoked to get into. We've checked out Kardashev before, and I quite enjoyed what they were doing. And of course, the lead vocalist, Mark, also does a vocal analysis slash reaction channel. Super knowledgeable guy. Really great vocal technique as well. So I'm excited to dig into this and get a full taste of something that Kardashev is doing. So we're going to start off with the opening track, The Approaching of Atonement. We'll let it roll right into track 2, and then we'll take a break and talk about what we listen to. Let's dive in. Real interesting production right off the bat with this drone gently sway from one side to the other. It's just the tiniest nuance of panning.
Their dancing melodies swing with the wind, a unison of wonder from the heavens. Surface level beauty apparent to common eyes.
Oh, nice. A highly compressed, flattened out echo from the spoken word that kind of exists as these slicing whispers off to the side.
My own negligence. I caused us all so much grief, and the guilt consumes me still.
Muffled drums in the back.
I love this place.
Sparse snare and bass.
Stayed. The further from you I get, the more your face is clouded. I can't see you, and I can't hear your name. I don't want to forget. I don't want you to disappear. I need to return. I need to see you again.
Really interesting riff coming into this, kind of metalcore into black metal. Bass presence amongst this black metal riff. I noticed that the guitar riff in the background, the one that says metalcore, is a heavy arpegiation. Interesting production. It's going to take me a little bit to get used to it. Very unique. So we shifted into a 6/8 feel right there before getting our ritardando into this. The accent pattern's strange already. That's why, okay. So we're still in 6. But a lot of our, we have a downbeat on 1, but it usually is accompanied with an offbeat of 6, like leading note. Like that. Da-da, da-da. But as you just heard, it's not always that way. So that one was another one right on the downbeat. And occasionally we get one on 3 as well. Are those synths out there? I can't tell. Bass coming in with that line again that we heard earlier. Yeah, I like that bass line. This was the same breakdown we had earlier, but with vocals on top of it now. Very nice reuse of a section. Has this whole song been in 6? How did I miss that? Yeah, really nice transition there between the guitar riff and the drum fill. They work together beautifully. So tempted to pause it because I think it's going into the next track, and there's so much to talk about already. I'm gonna see it through. It's very ominous though. Yeah, it does. I wish I'd just stopped that earlier, made the call and just done it. Um, so right off the bat, I mean, the approaching of Atonement is a really nice introduction, probably thematically to the album. Didn't really introduce many ideas that were present in Silvered Shadows. Um, so it probably works best as an album opener, more so than a track opener. That is to be a, an introduction to our second track there. Um, so I think it's primarily there to be the thesis statement for the album. What kind of topics and themes are we going to be exploring? I think that's why it's done through spoken word with very minimal musicality going on around it. However, it does introduce us to the drone and gazy elements, just filling a space with texture and really leaning into atmosphere, feeling, and emotion of a work of art. And through that, it really it tuned my ear for where we were going with Silvered Shadows, at least as far as composition, because Silvered Shadows kicks off with some black metal, tremolo picking and 16th note back and forth on the snare and bass, those gnarly vocals, just a very blackened sound overall. But aside from that, a lot of the guitar work here, there are a few melodic riffs throughout this track, but most of it is this atmospheric work. Even when we look at the bass, it occasionally has these really nice runs to it, but for the most part is very texture based, very harmonic based, sitting on pedal tones. For a majority of the time, moving with the chord progressions, but really leaning into a single note. Occasionally, usually at the end of a phrase, having some sort of riff, some sort of ending line that helps bring the song or bring the phrasing to an ending and loop back to the beginning of the phrase. It's it's interesting because a lot of it does feel blackened to me, but we're not always doing black metal ideas. And I did do a little bit of research on this, not not quite intentionally, but I do open up a bunch of tabs for lyrics ahead of time to save a little bit of time in the future. And I do check out Rate Your Music real quick, just to get a little bit of backstory on stuff to get the track list so I can fill out, the name of the songs over here so I can flip that around as the track progresses, as the album progresses. And I did come across the term Blackgaze, which I've never heard before. I'm not sure that I get that idea from here yet, at least not up until the end. There was something towards the ending of the track, not necessarily the outro, that I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of shoegazy. But for the most part, it just feels like black metal to me. And, we've actually talked about recently, I wish I could remember what video it was on, that I mentioned that that black metal and shoegaze are actually very similar. They're very texture based, they're very atmospheric based. They both use a lot of compression on the guitars, usually to a point that you can't hear the attacks anymore. You don't hear the pick against the strings, you just hear the note and the timbre of the instrument. The real big difference is in black metal's aggression versus shoegaze's laid backness. It has its own aggressive elements to it, but nothing like black metal's 16th notes on the in the bass and the gnarly vocals, and really going for darker sounds. Where shoegaze can kind of go in a lot of different directions and has its own branches, for emotional resonance. So some of the darkness that sits on top of this track and kind of gives it that specific flavor, that emotion, I think come more from the blackened area, whereas usually when we kind of pull back from the aggressive sounds, that's where more of the gazy stuff comes from. But at least this track to me feels more black metal than shoegaze. However, it's only one track out of 11, I think, so we have a lot more to explore, and it's possible we may find songs that mix the two styles with a bit more balance. Um, Melody. This was interesting because neither black metal nor shoegaze, to me, are really melodic styles of music. As I just mentioned, they're very texture based. It's very much about crafting a sound for your instrument and then using that sound to create an atmosphere. So I thought it was interesting when our opening track ended with this arpeggiation, this rising and falling arpeggiation in the guitar. That led us into a very black metal opening for a second track that eventually introduced that same arpeggiation once again. And throughout the song, we eventually brought in clean vocals that also had very strong melodic components to it, and more guitar riffs with melodic components. It is easily my favorite part of this. Quick bit of transparency. So far, this is not my cup of tea. I'm still going to approach it objectively. There will be some subjective takes throughout here. I tend to give my opinion about things as well, but I'm still going to mostly be talking about what it's doing, how it's doing it, and what it accomplishes through its actions, more so than my feelings about it and how much I'm enjoying it. But yeah, if the rest of the album is like this, it is not something I would typically listen to on my own. And so far, it's not something I'm too keen on revisiting, though, as I mentioned, I am quite impressed with what they're doing so far. Um, but yeah, so the melodic components are right up my alley. I love that. And we pair them also with textural sounds as well. The melodic guitars are usually played over atmospheric guitars. The clean vocals are often played against screams and growls, giving us really nice texture harmonies there. And so it's just really surprising to find so many moments of melody in something self-described as Blackgaze. Combination of two genres I don't associate with melody very heavily. So I thought that was really neat, and it gives me something to look forward to, especially if we keep hearing those vocal layerings, because I'm just a huge fan of that vocal layering in general, harmony, counterpoint, hocket, whatever. You have two vocalists going at the same time. I'm here for it. And something I've grown to quite enjoy is layering cleans against harshes. I think it just sounds phenomenal. So I'm really glad that that's all here. However, one thing that I have a real big issue with right now is the production. And I mentioned when Silver Shadow started, I said something like, the production is unique. It's going to take me some time to get used to it. We're 10 minutes into this album. I'm going to tell you, I'm not quite used to it yet. It is interesting because here's the thing, right? Black metal is known for varying degrees of fidelity within its production. We have lo-fi, we have mid-fi, we have hi-fi, we have toilet bowl. There's so many different ways to mix and produce a black metal sound. And so when we combine some of the lower-fi elements of black metal with the fact that we're going for wall of sound, texture is king kind of idea here, we create something that, well, here's the other thing, because we're mixing that black metal with the shoegaze with something that feels very modern mainstream. There is a cleanliness and clarity to everything, and I think this is my issue right here, is that the two sides are clashing. The lower fidelity, wall of sound, texture stuff, and the clean, clear production are kind of clashing in an interesting way, and it pushes different instruments to different levels of it's like, okay, so like when you're looking at a picture, right? You have your foreground, your background, and then the midgrounds. I don't know. I'm not an artist. There is a middle part though. Um, so music has the same thing where instruments can be placed closer to the listener or further away from the listener, although that probably looked reversed to you because this would be closer to you and further from you. But trust me, it was closer and further from my perspective. Um, and so usually when we're looking at mainstream music, um, depending on your genre, you're going to have different instruments that are more present, more closer to the listener. But usually, regardless, the vocals are going to be the most present, the most in the spotlight, the clearest to be heard. And with that, usually brings their pitch, their range as well. Wherever they typically sing is going to be mixed more clearer than everything else. That's kind of true here. Again, we're trying to mix this modern clean production with a grittier one. And so the vocals are very big in present, but not always near to me. They're sort of stuffed into the mix, which is a very black metal thing, but they're very loud and prominent, which is a very mainstream thing. And that's clashing. It feels like the vocals are fighting for air. They're trying, they're screaming, trying to be heard, and the music is swallowing it up. And so my ears are hearing this where the vocals have volume and I expect them to be large and present, and then they're not. And that's an interesting concept. If you hear an electric guitar and you hear all that distortion and that grit, right, and the destruction on it, you expect it to be loud. When it's not, your brain makes you believe that it's far away. If it's loud and if it's perceived to be loud and it's quiet, distance, must be weakening the sound wave. There's specific timbres to a yell or a scream that feel very different or sound very different from casual levels of speaking. And so if you hear those components and you're like, oh, this dude's yelling, but it's quiet, you imply that they're far away. When something is close to you and it sounds like it should be loud, but isn't loud, the brain is doing all sorts of gymnastics trying to figure out what this means. It feels unnatural. And that's what's going on here. There's something about the vocals. They're loud, they're big, but they're tucked into the music. And it sort of unbalances everything. I don't know if everything else becomes unbalanced because of it, or if my brain trying to figure out what that means is causing everything else to sound different. But then the guitars take up so much space, but they're also a bit quieter. The drums are very, very present. The drums are a very loud sound throughout here. Personally, I think we could take them down just a little bit, but again, that's a subjective thing. I'm sure Kardashev and I think they were signed to Metal Blade at this point too. So I'm sure between them and their producers, this is the sound they wanted. So I'm not saying it should be changed, but to my ears, I think I would prefer for the drums to come down just a little bit, the vocals to come up just a little bit, and here's a real big key. There's a ton of reverb here. Primarily on the vocals, and we hear a lot of it at the end. And the reverb ends up taking up a lot of space. I thought it was very clever to use it in the first track, the approaching of Atonement, with that delay giving us the echo, and then really compressing it down, silencing it, and getting like this. I don't remember what I called it. I think I called it like a slicing echo, something like that. And that's what it feels like. It feels like a thin cut of an echo. You don't get the full body of it. You just get um, this ghost, right? If corporeal is full bodied, this would just be like a portion of it. It might as well not even be there. It's ethereal. It's really neat, and I love the use of echo and reverb in that point. But in this track, it takes up too much space that I think other instruments are really fighting for. And what I'm hoping is that while I didn't really appreciate the sound of the production, that there's a reason for it. Maybe we get into the lyrics and, they're about, I don't know, things were echoes and reverb and illusions doubling up. Any of this might make sense, and they're creating word painting, utilizing the sounds of the music to mimic what's going on in the lyrics of the music. That is really my hope here, because to my ear, again, completely subjective take here, the production really holds this back. But if it's done for an artistic purpose, at least I can appreciate it on that level. And again, I'm going to repeat it. This is obviously what the band and the producer landed on. They produced it this way, they mastered it, they shipped it. They're happy with this to some level. Nothing you ever ship is perfect. There's always things to correct, but they've reached the point where they're happy with the album, and they shipped it this way. I'm not saying they should change it. I'm just some dude on the internet. Just got my own opinion. But yeah, that is how I feel about the production, and I hope that as I get more used to it, we have another 50 minutes ahead of us, that I get more acclimated to it. But right now, it's just very jarring. It pulls me out of the music consistently. There is one last thing we need to touch on. Story. What is the music telling us? The song is really interesting because the structure feels like it should be typical. We come in with our intro, we have an A, and then a B, a verse, and then a chorus. We come back to another verse. I don't remember if we go to another chorus, but somewhere around here, though, we call back one of our intro ideas. It was a breakdown, but we put vocals on top of it. Then we go into a bridge, a brand new section. We come back out. We repeat some of the older ideas. Very much an A-B adjacent concept. I don't know if it's that exact structure. And then we go to our outro, our 1 minute transition that takes us, I'm presuming, from this track into the next. And I really like the callback that they did in the middle there, because assuming that the reverb is an artistic decision, and assuming that the echo in the first track is an artistic decision, all of this to tie into other ideas, there is a sense of duality, of revisiting, of double vision, after image, all these sorts of concepts of the past and future colliding simultaneously in this track. Well, in these two tracks. The idea that there's ripples, anything that is done, especially primarily with the reverb on the vocals, has ripples that exist both in the future but are echoes of the past. That line has already been said and it is now being repeated, but it is an old line. And so it's really interesting when you pair that with the time signature, which is asymmetrical. I mentioned somewhere in the middle of the reaction that a majority of this track, if not all of it, is in 6/8 or maybe possibly 3/4, depending on how the band decides to feel it. I was counting it in a faster 6/8, but you can always count it in a slower 3/4. The thing about odd time signatures like that, not odd as in strange, but odd as in odd versus even, is that they're asymmetric. So if you want to find a middle point to create a sense of symmetry in the middle of a bar, you're looking at a half of a beat. So in 3, it would be on the and of 1. And so that's weird because nobody really counts that way in music. It makes more sense to do it in 6, which is an even number, and so your halfway point is 3. But even when we reach the point at the early moments of the bridge, when we had just the snare, right? And I was talking about those really odd accent patterns. Once again, we have elements of echo and reverb going on here, where we were getting an accent on beat 1 of every grouping of 6, Occasionally, also an accent on 3, but more particularly, occasionally, a leading hit on the and of 6 into the downbeat of 1, which kind of feels like it jumps the gun, but also makes it feel like the and of 6 is the accented hit until we realize it was actually like a grace note or a leading tone into the downbeat. And once again, we have this idea of duality, of past and present, being separate but the same. It's it's really interesting, especially when that's not always how it happens. I could not find a pattern, but sometimes we would just get the downbeat of 1 instead of the lead in half beat earlier. I don't know what to make of all of this, but I keep seeing these recurring ideas of echoes everywhere. And I think it's really interesting that they've leaned into this so heavily, given that this track runs into the next, and for all I know, the whole album goes without stops. I'm curious if this is going to be a song about time. Maybe going into the future, maybe going into the past, maybe about, I don't know, nostalgia, maybe about, any sorts of thing regarding time travel, both literal time travel, moving between times, or mental time travel, reliving memories and stuff. Because this idea of doubling, of echoes, it's everywhere. And I'm kind of coming around to the reverb on the vocals now, especially with as powerful it is there at the end. They made a point to focus on it, ditching everything except the bass before we went into our shoegazy outro. To really focus in on the large, booming, reverby vocals and just how much of a ripple. I mean, it's not just like we had the sound echo for a moment and then die off. It muddied up the whole thing. There was so much reverb, it was difficult to hear what was being said now, which is, once again, if you're stuck in the past, it's difficult to understand what's happening now. Like, there's so many moments, I think, in the music that tie back to this that I'm really hoping they lean into it thematically somehow. Time is just so important. I mean, even that callback, taking the breakdown earlier, bringing it back later, but putting the harsh vocals over it, is revisiting the past in new context. Like, it just ties together so well. Um, just from an artistic. All right, let's hit the lyrics before I say anything else. Let's see if any of this is present in there. All right, to kick this off, we're going to look at the lyrics for the approaching of Atonement. And this one does kind of lean into the past quite a bit. It opens up with some really interesting metaphorical stage setting before diving into what I think is the most important part, which is this person's memories. He says, on the surface, everything is calm and beautiful, but underneath are my memories. A piece of me still remains cold and still, though, placed as a result of my own negligence. So I think this is really interesting. It says that not everything that's housed here in my memories is positive. It goes on to speak about this very specific piece of him, though. It says, I've caused us so much grief and the guilt consumes me. I left this place, but you stayed. The further I get, the more of your face is clouded. I can't see you. I can't hear your name. I don't want to forget you. I need to return to see you again. So I think this is interesting because it immediately dives into the past and the present simultaneously. It is both an acknowledgement of things that happened. It is an acknowledgement of what things have passed since that first event. He says, I get further away from you, right? So I caused you grief, then I got further away from you, and now presently I need to return. So you've kind of wrapped everything up here. We've glossed over it rather quickly. We don't know what this event is, we don't know who this person is, but we know our character's current predicament. Now I say character, could be vocalist, could be the lyricist, I don't know. But I mean, this might not even be a concept album for all I know. But right off the bat, we have ideas of regret and we have concepts of the past meeting the present and the past influencing the events of the present. He is returning to see this person now because of what happened in the past and because of what they've recently done, which is distance themselves. Moving into Silvered Shadows, I have a much less strong read of this. Um, Overall, I get the idea that this is a person recalling elements of their life and believing that it's passed them by, that they are close to their deathbed, and that of everything that they've done in the past, it wasn't enough. That's kind of what I get out of it. I don't know. I mean, the album art for this is a dude, a bit older, long white beard, and if I remember right, there's like little swirls like he's evaporating, right? So it could be somebody on their deathbed, or it could also be the idea of somebody fading away. Once again, tying into memories and stuff like that. It's just, there's so many layers to this. So, anyways, this track opens up with calling into perspective. It says, coin of pure gold in green oceans, or a setting sun sinking into open hands. I don't know what particular those two have to do with each other, but my immediate reaction was they're making me think about perspective right now. And so I tried to keep that in mind moving forward throughout this. It says, tucked away there where I've hid all my treasures, one hidden note in the loose earth with a map to the things that I found, drawn by hand, tied together with cloth torn from her apron. And assuming that this is conceptual, I don't know if it is, we're going to go with that, the cloth torn from her apron may be the person we were looking to return to previously. And this could be what led to this person wanting to return to them from our opening track. It might be that we started at the end and have now traveled back in the plot a little bit. Again, I don't know if this is conceptual. I'm running with it till I get proven wrong, though. But the idea that they've hidden their treasures here and with a map to all the things that they found, and I don't believe this is physical. I believe, once again, we're talking about memories. Again, perspective is king here. Later on, we see the ideas of a failing body, about somebody growing old and not being able to do much with it. A lot of, well, growing old, not being able to do much about it, and not having a lot to say positively for it. We do have this treasure tucked away, the memories, everything that I've done. But despite that, this person is a willow tree that they once knew, now have clouded eyes. There is dead tree and dead soil around them, and nothing is familiar. There's a shadow that blinds. I really like this idea of somebody being an old tree, right? And having the wisdom of time, but that wisdom is what informs them that their life could have been lived better, and they would have ended up as a tree with more fruitful ground, or more fruitful bearing. The chorus comes through. It says, I pulled the golden corn silk from my hair. I don't understand that line. Handmade curtains drew me home. I am a silvered shadow of old air where I live now, overgrown. I really like that idea of just being, at the end of my life and taking up more space than I should. I've put my thumb into too many pies. I'm overgrown. I'm disheveled. I could have taken better care of myself and those around me, and I didn't. I love that. And that's pretty much the whole song. That's what it seems to me, is somebody at their deathbed going through their memories and having a lot of regret, and being told through the metaphor of old trees, old plants, vegetation, and the way that that they can grow in improper ways, overgrown and you know, dead soil, killing the trees around them. Very interesting. So I don't know if they're connected, but we do have thematic connection between both of them. And you know, I was kind of going with just the time thing, but regret is also present in both tracks. Let's dive into the next track here. We have a few seconds left of Silvered Shadows, and we're going to move into Apparitions in Candlelight. Oh, you know, with all that rising energy, I really thought it was going to move into the next. Bad call on my part. Once again, Arpegiation over black metal playing. The production of this section actually works really well. But it was really difficult to hear the foundational guitar works in the last one, and I think that's kind of the issue I had primarily with it. I'm curious if knowing what lines are being said alter the way that I would read them as well. Because I'm not really getting the emotional depth either. There's a very different emotional feel between the clean vocals and the harshes. And I don't have a good way of doing that with my current format. Really beautiful section here. Yeah, okay, I'm getting some strong Deer and Grave vibes. There's those lead and snare hits again. We got these really nice flourishes in the guitar work. Bass is just gnarly down there. Yeah, a really nice transition into those bass kicks. Feels like a natural extension of where we were. Oh, layered harshes. Going after my heartstrings here. The raw precision of those bass kicks. Those are synths on the outside, aren't they? We got the counterpoint between the guitar and the vocals. I know, I know, I know. But the next track is only a minute long, and I get the feeling it's going to lead into the next track, and we gotta stop here because this is such a departure. I will not be able to talk about 3 different songs. My memory is good. My memory is not that good. I love this. This is a fantastic contrast from Silvered Shadows, assuming that thematically we're in a similar section, a similar area of poetry in the lyrics. I really like how we moved from almost that really aggressive anger in Silvered Shadows that felt like it was trying to be tempered down a little bit into this, which is pretty much a ballad with an occasional leaning into black metal drumming. It brings that intensity with it, but not necessarily the angst. We got to keep a rather subdued emotion throughout most of this. And I find it really impressive that it still feels like blackened gaze, despite the lack of aggression throughout most of the track. It really works well in that area. We also have the layered vocals. Once again, we kick off the song with cleans layered with those black metal shrill harshes. Eventually, we take those shrill ones and we pair them with growls. Just really great all around. I love every single time. And if this dude is going to be doing that through the whole album, I will continue to look forward to it because it is wonderful. Now, something really nice here is that we got more of the arpeggiated guitar lines. This is 2 for 2 here if we're going to exclude our intro, which isn't in the traditional style of the rest of the album so far, where we have these arpeggiated guitar lines on top of black metal style, 16th note or tremolo picking. Again, I have a real hard time hearing the attack, so I don't know how often they're strumming. And then the 16th note bass kicks or alternating bassing and snare on the drums. Interesting to hear it 2 for 2. I'm curious if that's just going to be something that the band does. We'll hear more of it. But what I loved was that we actually got a solid guitar melody, not something that feels like a riff that's designed around a specific concept, like the arpeggiation, but one designed to be a melody that shifts through multiple compositional techniques to tell a linear story. And I think it does loop through after 8 bars, but it's still a pretty lengthy linear concept, and it's played at the same time that our clean vocals are singing there at the end of the track, which gives us counterpoint. And it's just really nice to hear counterpoint in something black metal adjacent, which I think we should probably take a moment to appreciate this. I already talked about neither black metal nor shoegaze really being melodic styles of music. So right off the bat, just having melodic components to me is really interesting to have in something blackened adjacent. Blood, blood. But we also have very strong bass presence, very atypical for black metal. We have clean vocals, atypical for black metal. And now we have counterpoint, which is not just one melody, but two separate melodies playing simultaneously. There is a lot of stuff in here that feels experimental or possibly even avant-garde. I don't know if you make a distinction with those two. I do sometimes. It really depends on context whether I feel they represent the same idea or not, and I could not tell you why or when my brain changes that. But it does feel like an experimental type of black metal, really pushing the boundaries of the genre. Moving it into the gazy stuff, as I mentioned earlier, is not too far of a stretch. They share a lot of similarities in the sonic qualities, but incorporating all these other elements into it with a very clean and high fidelity production does push black metal into a very interesting space. I mean, this was a blackened ballad. That is cool. Like I mentioned, it doesn't always feel black metal, but it also doesn't ever not feel black metal adjacent. There is definitely some stuff going on in here, production wise, compositionally, that allow most sections to feel like they came from a black metal foundation, despite the song itself not feeling very blackened at all. It's very impressive to see this group pushing the boundaries of black metal in these ways that I'm finding more and more palatable. I enjoyed this track a lot more than the last, which is probably to be expected. It's more melodic, it's more chill, it's more focused on chord progression rather than chord emotion, chord texture. Um, and so, yeah, just general appreciation for, taking an old style and dragging it into new directions, whether it wants to go there or not. I'm a huge fan of that. I love watching music get the boundaries of music just get pushed and ripped and torn. Another thing I need to bring up, and I wish I'd remembered it last time, but I'm talking about it now, is their transitions. They are solid most of the time. There are some really harsh transitions where we start doing this and then we do this, and there's just nothing that ties them together. But on the whole, it seems to be a band that really appreciates the nuance of transitions and appreciates or has an affinity towards, I should say, connecting ideas. And it's something that I drastically miss in a lot of metal that I get thrown my way. A lot of bands are like, this is our first riff, this is our second. There's not much in common, but we're just going to move from this one to the next, and just you better be ready to come along on the ride with us. And Kardashev does a really good job, even when moving from less abrasive to extremely abrasive moments, finding a way to make it feel like it naturally went there, like there is a path that led to it rather than just being teleported into a brand new section of the world or something like that. It's just a wonderful, wonderful part of their composition that I am a huge fan of. And actually, that's kind of interesting because I know that I've praised a lot of components of their composition so far, but I've also said I'm not a huge fan of the sound overall. And I think that is mostly true. Again, I'm assuming that most of the album is going to be Blackgaze, probably more adjacent to Silvered Shadows than Apparitions and Candlelight. And through that, I like a lot of the ideas presented and the ways that they are combining different influences. But the overall sonic sound is very aggressive. Lots of growling, lots of 16th note playing. Uh, the black metal drums I don't think are ever going to be something I enjoy. So, there's a part there where I can appreciate the nuances, the parts themselves, but I'm not as big of a fan of the sum of the parts. And I think that's where this album's going to lie for me. Um, But it's going to give me a lot to talk about because there are a lot of really awesome things going on, even if they come together into something that doesn't quite work for me. The last thing, I want this to be the last time I bring up production. And I hope it is. Yeah, I know you're like, Bryan, you have control over what you talk about. I really don't. My brain just delivers things to my mouth and I say them. I don't know what I'm about to say half the time. I have a very loose script. I'm like, these are the topics I want to touch on. This can segue into that. Make sure you do that. Other than that, I'm just on autopilot. Anyways, the production really worked on this one. After a point, after our slow burn. Oh, wow, man, I didn't even talk about the slow burn. Yeah. I don't know that I have a lot to say about it, but it was just a really gorgeous section with layering in it and very separate ideas in the production. It got rid of the entire wall of sound concept to allow for this nuanced, spacious layering, and I thought it was gorgeous, and I didn't know the band had it in them. You know, they said black metal and gaze, and those are not spacious productions, they're not layered productions. Well, shoegaze is layered, but in a completely different context. Um, but yeah, so this is layered melodically, though. So many different elements being placed throughout in a very spacious production. And yeah, just phenomenal. I had no idea that was coming up. Beautiful section. Anyways, continue on with the production, though. Is that it worked after that slow burn. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it clicked for me. I don't know if the production shifted. It's still this wall of sound, difficult to hear nuance at the bottom. And it's the guitars, it's the synths on the outside, it's the bass kind of getting swallowed up a little bit, unless it gives a little bit of boost during the riffs that it has, a little runs at the end of phrases. It's still predominantly, you know, like 40% the music and then 60% the vocals. And the drums are just loud. But it worked a little bit better for me there. I don't know if it was the transition into it that allowed my brain to understand how the production worked within that section or what, but after that point I was like, yeah, it's not too bad. Maybe I'm just acclimating to it because at the beginning of this track, I called it out again. I think I figured out the problem is that the guitars are just a bit too quiet for my tastes compared to, it's not that the guitars are quiet, it's that they're quiet compared to the drums and the vocals. And there's just this imbalance between those two groups of instruments. But like I said, it started to work for me. So again, I want that to be the last thing I say because it is purely subjective and it is going to be probably the lone negative criticism I have for this, apart from me just not really enjoying the music that much, just because I'm not a big fan of black metal adjacent stuff. But again, I like the nuanced ideas, just not the sum of the parts. So yeah, from this point on, subjective, objective. We're gonna look at the facts of the music. Anyways, lyrics. To pair with the ballad that we have here and sort of the less aggressive and more somber atmosphere, we have lyrics that paint a picture of decrepit past. We describe a room with a small chair, lots of dust, splintered legs in the chair, cracks in the mirror, old portraits, and a table with a note carved into it. Interesting, most of this is spoken in the present tense until we reach this line. I believe what was written in that note, I am invisible, to very specifically point towards the fact we're looking at the past. This is a memory. And through this, we see the memory is filled with dust, broken pieces here and there. It's not a great memory to be in. And we talk about a longing for this time. It says, blinded by greed for a past I don't own. The shadows in this room have grown taller. The idea here, he says, I'm a pilgrim and I'm lost in the past. I love that idea. Lost in a past that has been molded and mossed. So when we reach the chorus, which we see in the middle and the end, it says, light the candle in the middle of the room, burn your bridges to a past that has been lost. It is a song about letting go of the past, that there might be pieces of yourself that you think are tied to this moment, but the further you get away from it, the more that the moment is just a recollection of the pain of this moment in your life. Maybe it's not necessarily a bad memory, but it carries negative weight for present you. Maybe it's a place you can't go back to. Maybe it's a memory with people that you can't see anymore. And so it brings pain. It brings pain to return to it. So he says, let go of those moments in the past. They might have been good memories at the time, but they're not good anymore, and you need to lose them. It's a really good meaning. What's the word I'm looking for? It's a good message. That's the M word I wanted. And I think it matches the intensity and emotion of the song very well, while continuing on with the album's themes of nostalgia and memory and time in a way that speaks about it positively. So with that said, let's dive into this next track here. This one is only a minute long, and it goes into the next one, which is only 5. So we'll listen to those back to back and see if I have anything to say about them. Otherwise, we might just keep pushing forward with another short track and another interlude. I have that backwards. Another interlude into another short track. All right, let's kick it. Feelings of emptiness, introspection, isolation. But harmony and brightness comes out of it. Really nice resolution there. The lingering. A return of the darkness into okay. Where are we going? Yeah, really dark chords here. That one right there. So we only have a 3-chord progression where the first 2 chords are the same, giving us a 4-chord phrase. Yeah, really great control over the song, the ebb and flow, having mastery over the listener and their experience with it. Really fun ride cymbal there. Yeah, the guitar and bass have been harmonizing this entire time, piggybacking off of what we just heard in Dissever. Here we're actually calling back Dissever again with this very ethereal, reverby sound on the outskirts. Calling back old things in a new context. So good. That is what a memory is. We're gonna take a moment to stop real. Man, all right. I have a feeling it's gonna go into the next track. That's the thing. All right, man. I never know when things are continuing or stopping. It's really interesting. Like even that right there, I paused it at the very last second. It could lean into our next track, but it could also just end there. It's keeping me on my toes, Kardashev. Um, the one thing I want to talk about here is the composition of these two ballads, Apparitions and Candlelight and Lavender Calligraphy, because there's something really interesting that's happening in them that is triggering a curiosity of mine. So I mentioned that there is an intensity, something that feels blackened but is overall not black metal. This is just, a heavier ballad, right? Especially with Apparitions and Candlelight not having too many harshes in it. This one had a few more harshes in it. Uh, but the idea here musically is melodic guitar line, sometimes paired, doing harmony with the bass, a chord-based guitar foundation, and then double bass kicks, straight 16ths all the time. And it started to dawn on me, really the only thing blackened here is the really aggressive drums because, well, honestly, it's just the bass kick because the snare and cymbal work is very light and sparse. So it made me start to think, could I incorporate that into my own works? I don't write black metal. I have used tremolo picking a couple of times. I think it's a fantastic texture for specific sections of music. It's not something I can listen to a lot. Even the 16th note constant picking of black metal is something that I find a bit too much most of the time. But that's really the only thing I've ever pulled out of black metal as a technique to utilize in my own work. But here, it got me thinking, what if I write my usual music, classical adjacent, layered, lots of melodic and harmonic focus, and then I just put 16th note bass kicks under it? And I'm wondering if that would give it an edge. And what if I like shifted the harmonic quality just a bit darker to better suit itself with that aggression, and what that would sound like? Um, so yeah, Kardashev, you just gave me an idea for something to experiment with, which is pretty cool. That's one of my favorite parts about listening to all of this music, and it happened more frequently at the beginning of this journey as I was constantly being given new sounds. But as I've been acclimated to all these different metal subgenres, I'm finding that a lot of them, as genres tend to do, are pretty similar. And so it really takes a new genre for me to hear things in a new light, much like Blackgaze, first time hearing this, where I'm like, oh, that's a neat use. And I think I could do that too. And now I'm curious what it would sound like. So, yeah, not any criticism about the song. I mean, it's fairly much in line with Apparitions and Candlelight. I don't really have anything unique to say here, so I'm just going to jump right into the lyrics. But I did want to bring that up. I think that's, again, one of my favorite parts about doing these reactions is hearing something in like some extreme metal and being like, oh, I could put that in classical, and that would be pretty cool. uh, so, yeah, I just really appreciate that you're putting ideas in my mind. Lyrically, once again, we're looking back into the phantoms of our past. This one seems to be about childhood. Um, and going through the pages of a diary. I like how so far we've had quite a few different ways to represent the idea of memories, of ideas past, stored somehow physically. It's really nice that the idea continues to evolve. Even though I don't see too much of a connection from song to song, we do have the thematic ties between them all. This one keys into a little bit of invisible circles, the sins of the father type of idea, where he says, presumably about his mother, oh, she's made mistakes, silhouette of a phantom, I know. As if to say that I see mistakes in her past that are familiar to me because they were mistakes in my past. I really like that idea. It's very, very depressing. Uh, but an interesting concept to work with, especially on the ideas of past and regret. The ideas of passing down trauma. Interestingly, the song ends looking at a letter that was alluded to at the beginning of the song. In it, it says, I love you forever, for as long as you're with me. And then outside of quotation, so I'm assuming that this is the narrator, the character of the story who's been reading this, says, what was your name again? And this is interesting because we've shifted from the idea of regret, of having a pure, uncorruptible memory. being able to peer into any incident in our past with focused clarity, hyper detail, as showcased in Apparitions, in Candlelight, going into minute detail of what the small chair that was full of dust with splintered legs looked like and what it was next to, the cracked mirror and the table with a note carved into it. Very intricate details about this memory. Here we're shifting into a different light. Memory and regret are still strong components of this looking towards the past with pain. However, there's a new type of pain: forgetting. It's a really strong line to end the song on when so much of this track is about remembering this person, who they were, what they did, seeing parallels of your life against theirs, and going to read this letter that they sent you, only to realize you don't know who they are. It's haunting. There's a tension there of having such strong feelings for something that you can't name that I think is represented fairly well with the music. It has that somber, depressive atmosphere to it, but a lot of it is also presented with the harsh vocals and the bass kicks that has an aggression to it that the other ballad on this track, on this album, didn't have. And so I find that a fascinating angle to go with. If so much of this album is about regretting the past, what does it mean when you can't remember it to regret it? I don't know if we'll fully explore that concept, but it is interesting. How do you correct your life moving forward if you can't remember the mistakes of your past? All right, we have another interlude and then another short track ahead of us, and then the lengthy back end of this album. We are technically halfway through when we finish this next 1 minute interlude. We will be past the halfway point in tracks, but just barely coming up on the halfway point of length. We have a 6.5, an 8.5, and an almost 12-minute track to wrap this album up. So we're moving into some heavy epics. All right, let's push forward with The Blinding Threshold. Oh, it did go into it, okay. With so many of these tracks pushing into the others, I think it calls into question, I believe it was the end of Silvered Shadows that does not go into Apparitions, what that means. There's been only one complete stop between tracks so far. Oh, back to the spoken word.
Fact of myself long gone. There are fragments in my mind of who I once was, but the memories are obscured by regrets, by apologies I'll never have the chance to make. My eyes no longer see them. Faces and shadows of those who have gone from my view. The weight of all I've seen blurs my vision. These eyes are not my own. I don't see myself in the mirror. I do not recognize this image.
It's like the third time we brought up the idea of mirrors.
Or present.
The other ones were all broken, but this one's clear, but doesn't represent the truth.
These eyes can't be my own. I can't see myself in the mirror. I cannot recognize this image. Past or present.
Coming in real hot from that heavy line. Oh, getting real sludgy here. Interesting having the chugging as a foundation rather than the wall of sound idea. Yeah, this whole section just feels like trudging through mud. Only the bass has any sort of dexterity to its lines. Of course. Really powerful cleans right here. Oh, a fade out. Well, I will take that moment then. I was gonna let it roll over because I don't really have a lot to say here, but it's one of the few hard stops here, so I'll got a couple of things I do want to touch on. Um, this is the last time I'm gonna bring up the production. It hasn't interfered with my enjoyment of the album in the last few tracks, and I was really curious. I hadn't said anything about it yet because everything we listened to was balladic. They were all ballad-like. Um, and I thought maybe that they had a different type of production for it. But this was much closer to how we kicked off the album, and I think I've just acclimated to the style. It's not as distracting anymore, and that started to make me think about palette cleansers for music. Like, do these exist? Like, if you're doing like wine tasting and stuff, you have water and it kind of wipes the taste buds clean and prepares them for the next flavor you're gonna have. But do we have that in music? Because music also has wildly varied sonic properties, and you definitely don't want them rubbing up against each other in the way that this has. The production on here was drastically different from what I was expecting and what I just got done listening to, which is more my speed. Um, and so this just came off as very odd. Um, and distracting. And now that I've acclimated to it, I kind of wish I hadn't have made some of those comments earlier. primarily because they don't seem to apply anymore. I'm curious if I go back and listen to Silvered Shadows if they will. Maybe the production has changed over the album, because I do know that they differently, or they produce their quieter, more introspective sections, such as the interludes and the slow burn in Apparitions and Candlelight, I think it was the track, drastically different than their bigger metal sections. And it's possible that the production has changed over the course of the album, as well as our characters. Again, I don't know if it's one character concept album or multiple stories and angles of this central thematic theme. Thematic theme. Good job, Bryan. But, there is a clarity coming through here where we started off looking at a ton of regret, and maybe we're pushing out of that. And the album as a whole is pushing towards living in the present, and maybe the production as a whole is becoming less reverberous. And maybe that's why this middle third of the album isn't as distracting anymore. I honestly don't know. There's still reverb on the vocals, as we just heard in that track, but again, they're not as distracting, so maybe they're pared back a little bit to fit thematically. Regardless, though, if anybody knows about musical palette cleansers, something you can listen to at, just 30 seconds, 60 seconds, something like that, to sort of clear production leftover from my ears and brain between songs, I think that would be really helpful for me, because this isn't the first time it's happened, and I try to account for it in my analyses, but here I didn't. Um, so yeah, I'm looking forward to comments about that. If anybody knows of anything like that, maybe white noise. That actually kind of makes sense to me. Or actually, maybe any of the noises. Maybe one in particular is more scientifically better to cleanse a listening palette, but those are probably the closest analogy to water as far as sound goes. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I'll be looking for comments if anybody knows of anything like that. Let's dive into some lyrics. So, the blinding threshold kind of takes where we were going with Lavender Calligraphy, the idea of not remembering the past, and brings it into perspective, I think. It does tie a lot of this together conceptually. I do think a lot of this is dealing with the same person. And as Silvered Shadows mentioned, it is an older person at the end of their life, who is a bit disheveled and overgrown, going back to the tree metaphor. But through this, they're also losing their memory. Their mind is becoming fractured due to their old age. And here we are seeing somebody lose bits of their memory that forces them not to recognize themselves. It says, I am transformed, a shapeless artifact of myself long gone. There are fragments in my mind of who I once was, but the memories are obscured by regrets and apologies I'll never get to make. It's really interesting, once again, I had mentioned earlier in one of the other lyrical dives that it felt like we were looking at somebody who was hyper-focusing on the negative aspects of their past, and while at one point they were standing tall with the message, burn the parts that of your past that bring you pain, it's almost as if they're losing grip with the elements in their past that bring them happiness. And everything is filled with pain. As he says, there are parts of me in my memories, but I can't see them through the regret and the missed apologies. And as this mind begins to become more fractured and damaged, he begins to lose the concept of the self. Says, these eyes are not my own. I don't see myself in the mirror. I don't recognize this image, past or present. This doesn't look like who I was or who I am. It doesn't match up with any self-identity I have of myself in any part of my life. And this could be taken two ways. One is where I just want a fractured mind, but I think two could also be the becoming of someone new. This is a transformative step in their life, and they don't recognize who they are from the past or who they just were. It is a point of introspection, becoming a new form, the self of the future. One is going to be a bit difficult of an album to listen to then. We have somebody dealing with mental failure, primarily with long-term memory. The other is an uplifting story of having a lot of regret in your past and maybe even your present, and taking a step forward to transform yourself into being someone better. Yeah. I think both of them have really strong artistic components to them. One of them I certainly want to listen to, and the other one I'm not really in the mood for at the moment. We'll see where they go with it. Compost Grave Song is a track about, well, going back to the idea of memory and regret. Remembering a time when he caused his brother's death, presumably as kids, buried him out back, and told his parents that he got lost. And all of the regret that comes with this. He mentions that his brother is now 6 feet below, 5 decades away. He says, "Let me go." He can't shake the face of his brother. He says, "You're gone, but somehow I stay," and that regret right there. He says, "Place upon me your blanket of soil." He says, "My mind aches to join you, if only that I could forget." So if death could bring me peace from this memory, I'm fine with it. And yeah, that is a heavy song. And once again, we see the idea of 5 decades away. This is a person who was presumably somewhere between 6 and 12, maybe. 6 seems a bit young for this event, so, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, somewhere in that range. So we're looking at somebody who is either past 60 years old or maybe even a little older, which goes back into my concept of an older person on their deathbed reliving key moments of their life. And it kind of ties the whole album together. Alrighty, we have 4 tracks to go, and we're only halfway through this album. I love it. Oh man, let's kick into this. We got Cellar of Ghosts. I am pretty sure we're gonna be stopping after every track now, unless there's not gonna be much for me to say. But our penultimate track is 8.5, and our final one's 12. So I think I want to do them separately. We might run these next 2 back to back. I don't know. We'll figure out when I get there. Let's continue on with the album with Cellar of Ghosts. Ooh, okay. The drummer's just disgusting with that raw precision. I'm loving the bass emphasis on this one. Really somber way to bring this down. I know there's not much time left, but I'm curious if they're going to stick here or do their signature 1 to 2 beats of silence and get heavy again. Interesting. Very neat, because that's usually something we'll hear in electronica, not metal. Very smooth increase on that as well. Well, I'll take another hard stop to talk about things real quick. One thing I've noticed is that the way that I'm listening to the music has shifted quite a bit from the beginning. Whereas I was attempting to focus in on every single piece at the beginning and was finding frustration while doing so because of the production, now I just kind of take the atmosphere for what it is. I don't necessarily know what combination of guitars and synthesizers created. I don't know what the guitars are doing half the time as far as rhythmic ideas. It's just that wall of sound, shoegaze kind of thing going on at the bottom of the track, which I find again is an interesting placement, but it works. And I just accept it for what it is, and it has greatly improved my time listening to this. And I think it's not so much that the album has changed its production. It's what I had mentioned. I think my ear is just becoming attuned to it, but not necessarily just my ear, but my listening style as well. When I listen to things critically, I hyper focus on things. Yeah, what's this guitar doing? What's that guitar doing? What's the bass doing? What's the drummer doing? What's the vocals doing? What's the chord progression going on here? What's our time signature? What's our tempo? And I focus on individual components. And something that goes on with this, and it's an issue I've had with shoegaze and even black metal as a whole, is not being able to hear the individual components because of that wall of sound thing. Post rock took me a while to come around to it as well. And this seems to obscure things just a hair bit further. Maybe it's because it's a combination of gaze and blackened. And that's what really, I think, is the roots of my negative reaction to the production at the beginning of this. And now that I am approaching the music on its own terms, it's a much more enjoyable listen. And I think that's a really important lesson when listening to music is, a lot of things can bounce off of us for whatever reason. One of my favorite albums, I hated the day it came out and I listened to it, and I shelved it. And I pre-ordered it, super excited for it, and I shelved it that day and didn't touch it for years. And I came back to it and just adored it. I have no idea what I heard the first time. I can't remember. But I'm glad I came back to it. And, that's something that stopping in between these songs gives me time to process it in a way that a casual, full listen, just 1 hour of straight music wouldn't allow for me. And I think it's important to always come back to stuff, especially if it doesn't work for us. Give it time and give it another shot, and see if it works for you later on. Maybe it just needs to be right place, right time. You know, maybe you just really like it in this year of your life and you didn't like it the first time you heard it, and later on it doesn't hit the same way, but right now it's impactful. And there's so much about our the way that we approach music, which is based off of the things around us, the events around us, the moods we're in, um, our memories and actions, to kind of tie this back a little bit to the album itself, that influence our interpretations of art. And yeah, it's just always a really good moment to remind ourselves that we change. Uh, Whether it's something like this, where I picked up on a flaw in my own actions right here and addressed it to have a better read of the album, at least if nothing else for the back half of it, or coming back to an album years later, um, and realizing that we're different people. Our ears have changed, our minds have changed, and maybe we enjoy something now we didn't before. But yeah, there's no such thing as bad art. There's just art that doesn't click with us right now. And right now could be this minute, this year, this decade. But growth. It's always important to remember that we have that. Something I wanted to touch on real quick about Compost Grave Song that we did not last time, and I'm so sorry I missed this because it's a huge component of it. I mentioned how sludgy it was, that it was a massive change from the hyper aggressive, forward moving black metal stuff that we had heard that juxtaposed the ballad tracks in this album. Compost Gravesong was just drastically different from both of the two modes we had been presented with, and I had likened it to trudging through mud. And specifically, I was thinking of waist deep mud and just all the effort it takes to move one leg in front of the other to get through it, and all of the resistance that you need to push through to make that progress. And it just dawned on me that this idea of moving through mud, the idea of a brother being buried out back of earth, of wanting a dirt blanket put over yourself, your brother's dirt blanket, metaphorically. Yeah, there's just a lot of earthy ideas going on in there. I think it was a really smart decision to move to something that is so heavy. I mean, the topic itself is heavy too. And the regret must be palpable compared to, missed apologies, like they had mentioned in, what is that, Blinding Threshold, I think. This is just so much larger of a regret right here, so much more grief tied to this, that it would be a weight on oneself. And to feel that in the music, I think it was a perfect time to completely shift genres, and move into something that lacks that forward momentum and energy that we had heard in the blackened sections. While also just being a really nice contrast to especially the ballads we had just got done listening to with Lavender, Calligraphy, and Apparitions and Candlelight. Speaking of contrast, the Cellar of Ghosts is how we get back to where we were. Ballad after ballad, and then the sludgy song, and now just kick in from beat one. Full power overdrive, speed, direction, momentum. This is the high energy contrast we need to finish out the album, presumably. Glass Phantom sounds like a ballad title to me. Vagabond's Lament sounds like a ballad to me. Beyond the Passage of Embers, that could kind of go either way. See, I was ramping this up to say that Cellar of Ghosts is bringing us up, increasing the intensity back so we can hit a peak for the end of the album, but I don't think that's going to happen now. Reading these titles, I think we've hit a new peak. We might dip back down and then hit the climax in Beyond the Passage of Embers, especially since it's our 12-minute epic, longest one of the album. It's, I'm hoping, going to be the high point of the album. But yeah, there's nothing specific in Cellar of Ghosts that we haven't heard before. I don't have anything new to address in it. We return to the form that we heard earlier with Silver Shadows and Apparitions. Nope, just Silver Shadows. Parts of Apparitions in Candlelight, but most of that was a ballad. Yeah, this is interesting, because this is Blackgaze. We start off with a ton of blackened metal, adjacent music. We really never revisited that. Apparitions and Candlelight was a ballad. Lavender Calligraphy was a ballad. And Compost Gravesong is a bit more aggressive, but sludgy, not blackened. They kind of leaned real hard into the gazy aspect here, with the only black metal component really being the harshes and the bass kicks, as I talked about in the Lavender Calligraphy section. Yeah, I'm actually enjoying this album more than I thought I would after Silvered Shadows. There's still a lot of components that are just a bit too aggressive for my tastes, but overall there's some really neat ideas throughout here that come together. I mean, Apparitions, Dissever, Lavender, Blinding Threshold, Compost, that 5-song group, and I think they all flow into one another too, is great. I love most bits of all of that. So I'm kind of interested to see where we go from here then. If we get more ballads, I'm on board for that. If we don't, I'm on board for that. Like I said, we should be ramping up towards our peak anyways. So, yeah, interesting. Interesting overall flow and direction of this album. It's kind of keeping me guessing now. They could go anywhere. because even though it's Blackgaze, they have so many influences. You never know what they're going to pull from as to use as a foundation for the next track. A lot of these tracks are talking about temporal displacement through memory, thinking back on the past. I think this is the first one that physically moves into the past. It's about our narrator returning back to a place that says, in the cellar, underneath the stairs, sips of wine stole when I was young, candlelight ghost stories. So it might even be the childhood home. Further on, though, it says, what does it mean to be standing here, to breathe in your ghosts again? It says, I never knew the pain in your hands. I took for granted the days that I saw you. Didn't quite realize that this person, presumably a parent, maybe just an older family member, that they were not healthy and wasn't aware of that. And so the death might have come by as a surprise to them. The ghost says, breathing in your ghost again. I think that's a phenomenal line about being here in a place where a lot of these memories of this person are still existent. We move on to the concept of isolation, though. It says, I know all the hours that I've spent alone, so come away with me. Very interesting line. It says, I'll make things right. A misted face in the mirror, I'll become your host. Growing shade of a past I can no longer know. And it makes me think that it's almost using memories. I mean, we go back to the idea of the treasure box, right? This physical embodiment of something, a physical container of treasures. A way to preserve things that people might want. And this is using the self as a treasure box. I will become the host of you. I will house memories of you, and I will tell people of who you were and what you did. I will become the treasure box. I think that's a fantastic way to circle back to something we've done in the past once again. It's not even just revisiting moments in the narrative of this character, but revisiting moments and ideas of the album. It's kind of phenomenal. I'm surprised at this point that at least I haven't picked up on a return to any licks or riffs or ideas from previous tracks. I think that would really tie everything together here. And I'm kind of hoping that our epic ends up being a collage of several of the musics, several of the passages we have heard throughout the album. A collection of the album compressed down into a bite-sized component that can be easily remembered. So yeah, that's what this one is about. I mean, it fits with the title, Cellar of Ghosts. You don't get more on the nose than that. Alright. We're moving forward with Glass Phantoms. Let's see what's going on here. Yeah, so that was interesting. I was counting this in 4 and was getting 3 bars with really odd accent patterns, but I think it's actually in 3, so you get 4 bars. The accent patterns line up a lot better. This is chaotic. I made the wrong call thinking this would be a ballad based on the title. That's a new vocal style, right? What does that make, our 5th on the album? actually, speaking of recurring ideas, this drum pattern is the one from Silvered Shadows. When we hit the 3 section and I talked about the lead-in accents and how every once in a while we didn't get a lead-in to our accent. Ooh, a little bit of a shift there. Enjoying the ghost notes. Nice little extra flavor on this section to increase the intensity. Yeah, passing the bass line to the guitar. So there are some little guitar things going on over here. Really difficult to hear them against the wall of sound though. Intentional, I think, but I wish I could hear exactly what's going on there. All right. So something I've been picking up on is some signature transitions of theirs, and there's two that they really like to use. One is isolated bass, usually as a way to slip into a quieter moment. The other is the silent break. I don't know what to call it. It's one beat, maybe 2 beats of pure silence or something close to silence. We usually see either a lingering note, whether that's from a single guitar or the single bass, and it's had time to kind of approach its cutoff where it's barely audible anymore. It's smashing that right up against a full body, full volume, full band section. We heard that right there at the end. We actually heard it 3 times in this track, but we've probably heard it close to about, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, just on this album as a whole. Maybe even 10 times now. I had mentioned it even earlier. I don't remember what track it was. I was like, are we gearing up for a signature transition? That's it right now, right there. They absolutely love doing this, and it works because of volume dynamics. This is something that we often don't see in, once again, black metal. A lot of black metal sits at one volume. Even if they go to push towards a quieter moment, the volume hasn't changed. The width of the sound just has, and it appears quieter. But this band actually reduces the volume for some of their quieter sections, and so we actually have a volume contrast between our highest points and our lowest points, and it allows for those really big explosive returns, especially from silence, to have impact, to have punch, to feel large, because they're not just coming off of a silent moment, they're also coming from a section that was quieter than where they are going next. It is really important to utilize volume contrast in music like this. I believe that needs a disclaimer, because a lot of music like this, particularly black metal, doesn't use volume dynamics, and they're successful. They have huge fandoms. Obviously, it's not a necessity, but if you want your 11s, when you are just past the peak of volume and this is your biggest moment, if you want them to feel big while you're constantly utilizing them, you need to contrast them with something quieter, not just apparently quieter, where it sounds like, oh, we're in a quiet section. You need to actually reduce the volume. And so that way, when you bring the volume back up, the listeners actually has a difference in sound there, and it has the impact that it needs. This is something I've talked about a few times on the channel, is that bands go for this style of music, of high impact versus quieter, softer, just smaller sections. And when it doesn't land 100%, it's usually a production thing. And most of the time, it's a lack of volume dynamics, because you can't have punch if you're always at 11, because that becomes the norm. And so I'm really glad that while this band runs at max volume, max width, a vast majority of this album, that they still have moments to bring it down, whether it's the interludes, the little 1 minute tracks peppered throughout the album, or if it's just a little moment, even those 1 or 2 bar quieter sections that I'm always a little disappointed we don't stick in for a little longer. We heard one of them here. We had the bass kind of give us this nice melody, and we did that for like 2 bars, and then the full band came in, full power, like double bass kicks, stuff like that. But even that, those 2 bars, the 3-4 seconds that it took up, was enough to sort of give us a reset of volume so that the impact could hit. Little bits of contrast like that go a long way in ensuring that the big moments of your album actually feel big. So I just wanted to point that out real quick. The last thing, this is not criticism about the band at all, or the album. Just a thought I had listening to this track, primarily the clean vocal sections. I really want to hear this vocalist in a post-hardcore band. I don't know why. I think it'd be awesome. I believe they're in another band outside of Kardashev. And I gotta go check that out to see if that's more metal. But I really want to see them in a post-hardcore environment. And I don't really know why. I'm not going to say there's any quality of their clean vocal work, and especially not their harsh vocal work, that I think really aligns with that genre. I just think it would sound really cool. I don't know. It's a weird thought I had while listening to this, and I was like, Bryan, why would you think that? I was like, I don't know, man. Say it. Maybe someone will agree with you. I'm like, okay, dude, I'll do it. I don't know. I got voices in my head. Let's hit some lyrics. So this song is shifting into a direction that carries on from Cellar Ghosts, Ghost Cellar? Cellar of Ghosts. We have taken in the memories of this person and allowed our body to be their host, and they've taken a bit of a supernatural twist, though I believe it is purely metaphorical. Sorry. It says, I stood upon the porch that you brought into being with your hands. So once again, we might still be at that childhood home, and physically placing ourselves in memories. There's some anger, some yelling, possibly back and forth. Eat your words, you dying coward. I don't deserve this. Let me come home. Give me back my mind. Spare me from this. And I think this is a type of trying to let go of these memories. They obviously have a hold over our narrator, and they continue to influence their actions. I mean, they wouldn't even be at this house revisiting these memories if they didn't have a hold over him. Later on, he says, the apparition of thoughts in my mind like shattered glass in the light, clarity caught in my throat, it hurts to know. Curse of my eyes to see what is gone, and curse of my hands to cling to the past. Please let me come home. I love the imagery here. I'm not going to say that I completely understand what's going on here. There is one stanza I completely glossed over, which explains a little bit. He says, tell my father, his bastard son has come into the place of his birth to take his claim. And I guess that's to say that I've come back to my childhood house to take, the house is my inheritance kind of idea, wanting to clean out the ghosts within, possibly, because this house is haunted for our narrator. And it's possible that even just being here has forced his mind to revisit many of his father's words. And to revisit maybe some sort of abuse, verbal, maybe physical, that the narrator was a victim to in this place. And he just wants to be free of these memories. That's kind of what I'm getting out of this. It says, let me come home, because right now it's not home, it's a house. It's a haunted house. And he wants it to just be a home. The place that he grew up in. Not the place of these haunting memories. Yeah, the album is going in some really dark directions. I mean, we have a child who possibly was verbally abused by their father, who also allowed their brother to die, or maybe even killed their brother and hid that, lied about it. The opening of the album said that most of my memories are regret, and it's what I live with the most. And there's a lot of layers of regret. I regret not taking that leap of faith and getting that dream job, and now my life is just a little bit worse off. That's very different from I regret killing my brother and lying about his death. That's a bit heavier. It's not where I thought we were going with this album, but with 2 tracks left, I really hope we have a bit of an upswing here. Maybe a way for our main character to forgive themselves. But I don't know. The album doesn't seem to be pointing that direction. One thing I haven't really touched on much is synergy between lyrical themes and musical ones. There really aren't that many. Most of the songs tend to have a melancholic atmosphere to them, even in their more aggressive forms, like in Silvered Shadows and, Cellar of Ghosts, Glass Phantoms even. And that melancholy, that somber, even depressiveness in some songs is fairly parallel with the Put your thoughts together, man. With the thoughts of regret and memory throughout a lot of these tracks. But beyond that, there isn't really anything in the music that I think ties into the lyrical themes too much, other than at the beginning, I saw a lot of concepts of revisiting old ideas and echoes and reverberations. Um, and the reverberation and echo idea is still present in the vocals throughout most of this, which I think is very interesting. I'm not sure if that's your style or not. Maybe it's just particular to this album, which is very much about ghosts of the past and having these echoes sort of reverberate around the main singer, the main character, and they're surrounded by their own sound. In fact, the history of their sound, I think, is very neat, but it could also just be the way that this band likes to produce vocals as well. But yeah, so far there hasn't really been anything besides just the raw atmosphere of the tracks that really lines up with what the vocals are doing. Even some of our softer, more somber sounds have had darker, more aggressive lyrics, and some of our more aggressive tracks have just kind of been mediocre, not mediocre, medium level somberness. So the intensity of the song doesn't necessarily match the intensity of the lyrical content all the time either. But I think just generally achieving the atmosphere that you want and carrying that melancholy throughout this entire album is good enough to at least support what the lyrics are doing. Even if you're not going to continue to attempt to pull all of these callbacks in and really tie in the concept of memories and revisiting the past in the musical component, which I will admit is quite the man, what is that word I want? Kind of irritating. It's a lot to bite off. It's a big thing to do. So I don't I don't mark off any points for them not attempting to do as many callbacks and to make something that is cyclical in a sense, where the future of the music constantly has callbacks to the past, because that also assumes that it was written linearly, chronologically, and most bands don't start from their intro track and write to the end. They just kind of write some songs and then arrange them on the CD later. Ambitious is the word I was looking for. It is a highly ambitious concept to do that on the compositional level. So the fact that they pulled it off a few times in here that I think showcased it to me and I kind of picked up on it, I think is already phenomenal. If the whole album had done that, it would just been next level. And I don't know too many composers in metal or outside of metal that would be able to pull that off with a strong execution. I think in most cases it would be an interesting concept that failed a little bit, left a little bit of wanting through the execution, just because it is such an ambitious idea. I would never even attempt it. I really wouldn't. It sounds daunting to make a song that's an album that self-references it just as much as the lyrics are referencing a past that isn't the album. All right, let's push forward. We have 2 more tracks left. This is also a third of the album right here. I love it. We have 20 more minutes of music ahead of us, give or take. Let's dive into the next track, A Vagabond's Lament. Ooh, a little bit of swing in there. Yeah, really heavy on everything except the cymbals, which are kind of swung a little bit. I'm really digging that juxtaposition. Yeah, the longer we can stick with this and explore it, the happier I'll be. I fully expect a big moment, but I'm loving this. The bass has been moved too? Yeah, the bass is off to the left now. The bass has been center left this entire time, and now it's residing over here somewhere higher than I would expect too. It used to be in lower. Although I think some of that is just the perception of pitch, because we have never heard the bass this high before. Beautiful layering. Yeah, those little ghost notes, I didn't even pick up on them. Really nice touch. Is that a reverb on the snare? It is. Even something as precise and immediate as a snare hit can't escape the rippling of its sound waves, creating a pass that surrounds it. Got that polyrhythm on the ride cymbal over here. Yeah, so it's a 5 against 8 idea. We're fitting 5 beats within 2 bars of 4/4. Man, this is just a vibe. Taking those ghost notes on the snare, pushing them over to the toms, increasing the intensity, the momentum. It's all working towards something. Where are we going with it though? There's bits of brightness in here peppered in amongst the more sorrowful elements. It's a really nice mixed atmosphere. Another polyrhythmic idea. Yeah, we saw the volume over there was half. We went from half to full. They love doing that, but it works so well because they allow these moments to breathe. the way that the drum pattern ramped up the intensity in the bass kick so that they could move into this constant eighths. Just such a natural progression of the drum ideas into this new section, new pattern. They're really great at those transitions. Those offbeat hits with the vocals. Such a good decision against the rigid accents in the bass kick. A quiet guitar thing going on here in the middle. Yeah, this is just a polyrhythmic track. So many ways it's incorporated. Wait, what? I'll be honest. We were like 6, 7 tracks in, and I was like, there's only been one stopping point so far. I'm real curious what that means. Everything flows into each other. And then this back half is just individual songs. And it's curious because lyrically, I wasn't sure if the opening tracks were connected. They certainly shared thematic ideas, but not narrative ones. But the back half is all very connected narratively. It's very easy to understand that all these are about the same person exploring a childhood home and dealing with the ghosts of that. I was paying attention to the lyrics of this one a little bit, and it's coming to an understanding of exactly what we were talking about in the last track. It ties in so well. It's just completely linear storytelling here. And this is where the music stops being connected, where the songs don't flow into each other. It's an interesting inversion of expectation. And I'm really curious what their intention were with it, if they even noticed it. It's very possible that the music came first, and the lyrics came second. So that the back half of the track didn't have this flowing element to it, but lyrically, later on in the production of the album, there was this very clear connected flow between the lyrics. Something else. Really love all the layering and stuff going on here. It reminds me a lot of whatever that other slow burn was. I honestly can't. Was that Lavender Calligraphy? They just excel at this. Their gazy stuff is good. Their blackened stuff is good. They do both of those very well, but I have a bias towards them, so it's really hard to talk about them as strongly as I think somebody who's into that type of music might be able to. I can praise it up to a point. It sounds good, great, against other bands that do similar things within those realms. Again, I've never heard Blackgaze in particular, but I've heard a lot of black metal and some shoegaze, so I can kind of judge them on that area, but it's not something I enjoy listening to, so at best I can judge it against some of the greats in the other realms. But these hyper dense, layered, beautiful, atmospheric moments are right up my alley, and they are just so well done. It's just, I wish they would lean into this more. I understand it's not their style. I understand it doesn't benefit the album. They utilize it when, the music demands it. And at least that's the idea I get out of it. They understand what the album is doing, what they want to say with it, the story they want to tell, and the music comes next. This song is about this. Well, let's write this kind of music for it. And not every song demands that. So I'm not requesting that they exclusively move towards that, although I would certainly buy an album full of that, just saying. But it is very well done. It's what I look forward to, and I think that's going to be our last one, but I love that it's our penultimate track, sitting there right at the cusp of what I'm going to assume is our largest peak at 12 minutes. This is the epic that ties everything together musically and lyrically, pulling the themes together and giving us a nice bow on it, hopefully. Um, and I don't know, it's just such a good way to lead into it, into the finale here. Is to just showcase this other side of their writing that they don't get to lean into too often. We hear a lot of the gazy stuff, we hear the black metal stuff, but this slow burn, alt rock kind of ultra layered writing, it's almost prog rock at times too. Now that I think about it, the bands that I think of that do stuff like this all kind of fit under the prog rock umbrella. Particularly, I'm thinking of stuff like Leprous and Porcupine Tree. Um, yeah, definitely names that you want to put your band next to, as far as being as good as. And I can't praise it any more than I have. It's just every moment is gorgeous. Every layer adds more, recontextualizes, and it's all done in a very tasteful way, both compositionally and production wise. And it opens up the songs in a way that the production doesn't do for the other moments of the album, which leads me to believe, that the production on this album, as hit and miss as it has been for me, is purposeful, it's intentful, it's exactly what they wanted, because when we get to parts like this that benefit from a drastically different production style, they nail it. So their producer knows what's up, and they know what's up with how they want their music to sound. So yeah, all the production criticisms I've had, and even my coming around to the production now in the latter half of this, it's all subjective. It really is, because they are quite in control. They know what they're doing. So the last thing I want to bring up, and this is more a thing for Kardashev, not that I'm expecting them to be watching this. I think very few bands are going to click on a 3-hour video of their own music and some dude on the internet talking about it. Maybe. I don't know. We've had a couple of band members do that, and I've had some really cool conversations in the past, but it definitely is not the norm. But if Kardashev is watching this, anybody in there, was there any concept or any point in the creation here that anybody said, hey, we should do a canon? Because I think that a canon would fit the themes of these really well. In fact, going to the invisible circles, the sins of the father concept from Lavender Calligraphy, that might have been a perfect place to put it, where the echoes of one set of actions get reflected in another set of actions, separate but similar. I think that would have been beautiful. I don't know if it ever came up. I don't know if anybody, in the group even knows what a canon is. It's not something that most mainstream composers, and yes, I collectively refer to anybody who writes music as composers. Okay, so if you're in a metal band, you write music, you're a composer. Take the title, run with it. 100%. There is no qualifications. You compose music. I don't think it's something a lot of modern composers really think about. It's kind of an older technique that kind of gets placed into a lot of older classical Modern classical has even kind of abandoned it a little bit. It's just not as popular of a technique as it once was, even in its niche. So, I'm not calling anybody, uninformed or stupid or anything, but yeah, it just might not be something that anybody in the band knows about. But I think it would be really cool because the concept works really well with this concept, or with the ideas, the themes of memory and the past influencing the present and subsequently even the future. All right. I think that was it for this one. We're going to hit some lyrics and wrap this up. This has been an adventure so far, and I'm ready to see how it ends. Earlier in this reaction analysis video, I had made comment about callbacks, especially I had a prediction that later on in the album we would see more ideas from previous in the album, and that maybe even our final track would be a collage of ideas or moments from the other songs. We are beginning to see a little bit of that here in the lyrics, which I think is very neat. He talks about some of the things he finds around him while he is digging through this house. It says curtain, candle, and letter, compost, cellar, and stone. These lines are repeated quite a few times at the end of the song. These were the offbeat syllables in that final clean section of the track that I pointed out. Now, if you'll remember, I think it was our opening track. Maybe it wasn't. Second track? Well, dang. Where is this? Anyways, there was an early track where they specifically spoke about a curtain over his face, or a curtain over something. And I thought it was a really odd line. Oh, here we go. It's the chorus from Silvered Shadows. I pulled the golden corn silk from my hair. Handmade curtains drew me home. I'm a silvered shadow of old air, where I lived now overgrown. And actually this makes sense now because I get it. The handmade curtains drew him home. The memory of the curtains is what started this whole trek to come back to this house at this point in his life. The candle and the letter, which we talked about in Lavender Calligraphy and Apparitions in Candlelight, the compost is the grave where his brother was buried, the cellar is where he just was, and the stone is something. Oh, the stone came from the Lying Glass Phantoms. We didn't go over the stanza. But yeah, there's a stone in his hand. And actually, this might have been his brother. Because if we go back to Compost Grave. Yep. Again, another stanza I didn't go over, but now is more important in retrospect than was at the time. It says, at the back of the house by the compost is the plot where my brother lies dead. He got lost, that's what I told them, and I'm mocked by the stone on his head. So he killed his brother with a stone. And so actually, okay, so the body, or sorry, the memories. Remember he said that I'll be your host, right? It wasn't his father, like I had mentioned earlier. I think it was his brother. Because the opening line says, say you're ashamed, spit the words out, this hatred I can't place, tears at my throat, stone in my hand. As I sobbed on the dirt, broken glass memories spread on the ground. It's almost as if, going back to that compost area on the plot, he remembered this argument that he had with his brother, which might have led to him hitting him with the stone, and then burying him back there. Would have led to the events talked about in Compost Gravesong. So yeah, Glass Phantoms might have been about giving his body as a host to his brother's memories and thoughts. But anyways, the idea, curtain, candle, letter, compost, cellar, stone, these are all really big ideas from the choruses. Not big ideas, but key items from the choruses of almost every track with lyrics up to this point. Right before this, though, he says, I never owned any of this. He's been pulling up the floorboards in his house and looking below it, and all he sees is past. It says, shades pulled from the bones of my old home, torn from the flesh of me. I never owned this. That's all the lyrics for this track. And to me it feels like a coming to terms with things. This might be my childhood home. These might be the memories that I have most about this place, about my childhood in general, about the people around me. If we can read into this a little bit in Glass Phantoms, he says, tell my father his bastard son has come home. Presumably, now that I believe that he's speaking to his brother and not his dad, he's telling his brother to tell their father that he's back, which means his father is dead as well. We spoke a little bit about his mother in Lavender Calligraphy, and it's very possible that his mother has also passed on. Says at one point, a distant voice of a girl who once ran from her father. So it could be that our main character's family, entire immediate family is dead. He's the last one. And he's come back here to relive some of this, only to discover that there wasn't really a lot here for him. I mean, he referred to himself as a bastard son, so maybe his mom didn't even live here. Maybe, his father took him and raised him with his half-brother's mother. Maybe I'm reading into the bastard son a bit too much. But he says that I never owned this. There's nothing here in his house that's mine. Why do I hang on to these memories? That's what I get out of that bit. Let's wrap this up. We got 12 minutes ahead of us. It's going to put us just shy of 3 hours. With a little bit of analysis, I think we'll be just over 3 hours. I don't know if I'm ready to wrap this up, but I don't have much of a choice. Let's dig into this. Yeah, what started as introspection is quickly shifting to something a bit more malicious, eerie. back to a 3 or a 6. After the snare hits, so we're a 4. We might be in 12. I love all the vocal harmonies here. You know, the sax is such an odd choice, but it works. And it also has a ton of reverb on it. Not even it can escape the actions of its past. Feels like we're coming down to a closure, but there's still so much time left. We're building out of it. Interesting. A build to
I have made my
nothing.
return to the place of my earliest memory. The consequences of my absence are clear. This place I once called home has gone from me. Were it not for my existence and the remnants of my frail memory, this tired world of mine would be lost. Though everything is different. The animals don't come here anymore. The ground has moved, and the arms of the earth have fallen. The windows peering through the overgrowth seem to face a different direction now. Even the cicadas sound different. I cannot fathom how, but everything has changed.
It's like a synthy chirp going on
This
after you
is
said
not my
cicadas.
home.
Okay. Wow. That was quite an ending. And coming up on the end in there, I was like, okay, I got a gist for this. There's 3 minutes in the song left. Nothing's gonna change. I started formulating, my final thoughts on this album. I had a couple new things I wanted to talk about, but jeez, where, huh? Just, and the thing was too is that I honestly thought the album was going to be bookended by spoken word. We began the album with spoken word. We'll end it with spoken word. And so we kind of cut everything down and we get the spoken word element. And I was like, okay, this is going to wrap it up. Maybe we'll have some sort of atmospheric outro. Maybe this is longer than I thought. I saw that there's still some time left. Was not expecting it to take us back to 11 and get all haunted house, like real demonic house levels of eerie and yeah. Okay, that's gonna take a second. While I attempt to process that, I have a talking point I wanted to discuss before I got caught off guard. I wrote down the phrase brutal beauty, and I think that fits really well here in that most of this album is going to be a bit on the aggressive side of things. It's going to be a bit too abrasive, I think, for a majority of people, myself included. And I've been on a metal journey. My tastes are getting uh, more extreme by the year, but even I find this to be a bit past my tastes, past where I typically listen to. And I know I'm much further to the metal side than most mainstream listeners. It is definitely a brutal album, even if it doesn't quite hit some of the brutal highs that more pure genres hit, such as pure black metal or pure death metal. Especially atmospheric black metal, I think, which is where this most closely ties to. Um, and bear in mind, I had all this planned to say it before the ending, which certainly took us to a new level of brutality. But despite the fact that most of this album is harsher than I think most people would listen to, there's still a lot of beauty in it. It is a gorgeous album, even in some of the more abrasive sections. They find a really good job. They find a very good line. What am I trying to say here? They do a great job of threading that needle between, gnarly, brutal, disgusting metal and beautiful atmosphere. And they do it all through the lens of regret and sorrow and melancholy. There's very few, if any, uplifting moments in this album, and yet it isn't overwhelmingly depressive. It is heavy to listen to, but it doesn't weigh on me like other depressive songs that we've listened to in the past, where the music is overwhelmingly dripping with this negativity. This is more of I don't know. It's present. There's no way to ignore the melancholy of the album, but it just doesn't weigh on me. Which I think does a good job of keeping a separation. And maybe this is all subjective too. Maybe other people listen to this and they can't help but sob through the whole thing. I almost reached the point in that final track, the sax solo passing off with the guitarist, and them just alternating lines there. Just that was a really good moment. I thought I was going to shed a tear there, but the song took a different turn before I could really hit that point. Decided to to ditch the saxophone for some metal, but yeah, maybe that's a subjective take, but I think it does a fine job of portraying the emotion at hand without dousing the listener in that emotion. I think, at least for me, it's easier to separate the emotion from me as a listener and for it to stay in the art. Kind of a weird way to talk about that, but it could also be my environment. I've said this many times. When I'm analytically listening to music, I have a tough time emotionally connecting with it. I can feel the emotion. I'll tell you what emotion they're going for, but I'm not getting to a point where I'm feeling it with them. I just know it's there. Very different between a casual listen and an analytical listen. But also, just having the lights on me, the camera here, the microphone in front of me, seeing a picture of myself over here in OBS's viewfinder, knowing I have a green screen behind me, like this setting, my brain is just in a completely different mode than if I'm just chilling on the couch with some headphones on. Um, I tend to be a lot more connective with music that way, even if it is more of an analytical listen. It's just a different environment for me. So yeah, that might be more of a subjective thing, but I think what I'm trying to say is, in the end, is that it is a song, an album that is gorgeous from start to finish. There's a few really gnarly sections I think that push away from the traditional beauty, but most of it balances that gnarly metalness with just this melancholic beauty throughout and does a good job of balancing the two of them. Um, I'm kind of at a loss. I can't wait to hit the lyrics here because the few things I picked up in the spoken word were not in any of the two directions I figured this thing was going to go. So, but by the end of it, the house felt evil. The ending of this comes quite out of nowhere. Basically interrupts the spoken word, does another one of those 0 to 11s basically. I think we were at like 40 or 50% volume and then just cranked it maxed out. Which in that moment, I fully stand by that. Some of the other times I'm like, okay, I was expecting that. This is what you do. But at that moment, I wasn't expecting it. And it came at the end of a song, and it came to introduce a section that we had never heard anything like it before on the album. Well deserves its use there, even if I felt it was becoming a bit trite by the 10th track. Like I'd called it, it's their signature transition. If things are quiet, you can almost guarantee we're going to immediately jump up to 11 at some point. Yeah, I don't have a read on the end. It just feels, he says, this is not my house, and then it gets all evil. Um, it's not melancholic, it's just eerie, it's oppressive, it's weighty, it's dark. Like I said, I might need the lyrics on that one because musically, a lot of the rest of the album tells me a story. I can get a pretty good gist of what we're going to be talking about based just off of the music. Here, I don't know, that jump could mean a lot of things. So I'm kind of curious to dive into that. Just to wrap up my thoughts on the album as a whole, though, I mean, this is a masterclass. Talking about the beautiful brutality. Yeah, brutal beauty. Masterclass in that. Really just finding the balance between these two and threading that needle consistently at a high level. It's not even like I think it failed sometimes. Just every song did it so well. I love the moments when they decide to step back from their two main styles of black and gazy stuff and go for the layered stuff. I've praised that so much. Tons of reverb on this album, which I think is thematically appropriate, and I got around to enjoying it at least. Melody, harmony, counterpoint, polyrhythm, all within a black metal framework. Love the genre pushing, the envelope pushing. Their transitions are so good when they're not going from 50 to 100. But all their other smooth transitions, I'm a huge fan of. And those we were quiet, now we're loud moments, they work. They have the impact, right? I understand why they do them. I really love the smoothness when you can feel the natural movement from one idea to the other. And when they decide to take that route, it is so smooth every time. And that's the thing too about this album is that exceptionally consistent. There isn't a lull in here. There's not really a song that I would say is worse than the rest of them. I mean, I have my favorite, but that's because it's kind of an outlier. Because it does, I mean, it's Vagabond's Lament. It's the one that doesn't sound like anything else on the album. It's the lightest one, right? Y'all knew that was coming. Um, but they don't have a low point. There isn't a song in here that's, oh, that's a bit weaker than everything else. Um, I do like the series of interludes too. I think it's interesting to front load them all. They're within the first 7 tracks, I think. We get all 3 of them. But then we load in the back of the album with all of our long songs. So I guess it kind of evens out. And everything else I think is track specific. But yeah, so I enjoyed this, even though it's something I'll probably never listen to again. Not really my cup of tea. I quite enjoyed my time with it, and I think they did a fantastic job crafting an album that just doesn't fail to hit ever. If you enjoy it from moment 1, you'll enjoy it to moment 60. Minute 1 to minute 60. Because they never drop the ball. It's so consistent. It's kind of wild how nothing in here feels any worse than anything else. But it just shows a ton of attention to detail from them. They didn't release it unless everything was supporting what they wanted to do, and as far as I can tell, everything does that. Let's hit some lyrics and wrap this video up. I'm curious about the lyricist's intentions with this. I think it's rather clear what they're aiming for, but I'm curious how they feel this wraps everything up. And it could just be a difference of perspective. But it's about setting the house on fire with our narrator in it. He says, "Take me home, flame on the floor. Tell them I'm home, light on the door, dancing shadows of me. So take me home, fire. Roof open wide, eyes to the stars, the sky. Attic, come down, rest on the ground, a light. No need to wake again, I'll never leave." That basically sums up the entire song. We continue to explore what's being lit on fire, how things are breaking and crashing. We have a couple callbacks to previous songs. He says, "Oublet, follow me down, forget me, down in the cellar, dirge sung in embers to the crackling of dry bones." Says, "In the morning, I'll be found, but no one will know who I am." He says, "I'm asking for forgiveness, but am I being selfish again?" He says, "But what else do I know? As a curling silhouette, I can finally let go." And that's it. Or at least I think it should be it. Interestingly, then we get the spoken word, which feels like it should come before the events of burning the house with you in it. Although maybe it is the final thoughts of this person on their way out. But it just speaks to how much things have changed. So much so that these memories that drew him here and the regret that he's felt all these years later, everything's so different. He says, "I've made my return to the place of my earliest memory, this place I once called home. But everything is different. The animals don't come around anymore. The ground has moved. The windows peering through the overgrowth seem to face different directions now, and even the cicadas sound different. I can't fathom how, but everything has changed. This is not my home." And I'm really curious what the purpose of this section is, because as soon as he says this is not my home, that's where we get the eeriness and the darkness and the real heavy evil sounding stuff going on. And what is all of this supposed to signify? Because at least to me, the whole point of the album is that the memories of this household have haunted him for years. The way that he was abused, possibly the way that his mother was abused by his father, um, the way that he killed his brother and hid that whole thing, how he's been carrying that secret his whole life. And he comes back to this place and he's haunted by more memories. He sees the cellar, you know. He goes outside to the porch and looks at, the porch that his dad built, or and he's like, I'm gonna burn the house down. I'm like, that part makes sense to me. But then we end, he says, this isn't my home. Everything has changed. And I'm trying to understand that because the concept of growth has been on the album's mind. We have the overgrowth of our main character sitting far away from this place wherever he lived, in the dead soil, I think is metaphorically what they stated. But then we also have the ideas of not knowing who you are when you look into the mirror. And I thought that might have been memory damage, but it seems to be an element of growth, being someone different today than you were yesterday. And I was like, okay, this guy's getting better. He's learning how to escape his history and to find peace with the events of his past. And here we lean into the ideas that this house is not my home, not my childhood place. It has changed too, which would lead to even more distance. He has zero ties to this building now. It's not his childhood home. He did find memories while being here, but it's not the same place. This should have been, at least to me, the jumping off point for this person to get past the grief and forgive themselves for this, for everything that happened here, and to live out the rest of their days as best they can you know, in memory of his family. And instead, he's still somehow overcome with guilt and regret that he thinks the only way to forgive himself is to burn himself in the house, where he can finally let go. He can return to his family. But it never really seemed like he wanted to return to his family, not throughout the tabs. I have multiple tabs of these lyrics open, one for each song. Through the songs, through the tracks. So I'm just kind of curious how we got here. It's very possible I missed something. I'm not a poetic analyst, and I'm only getting better by the by the month. Still nowhere near on par with the way that I read music. So it's possible I missed something in here that would have pointed to him moving towards this idea of a type of ritual sacrifice in order to absolve his sins, or his perceived sins of his past. But honestly, aside from him taking his brother's life, all the memories, the negative memories of this place, are things done to him by others. I just don't see where the jump to I'll burn myself with the house so that everything here can finally be washed away makes any sense. There's a finality to it for sure, but I don't see that the motivation in the character. Aside from that, though, I really like the way this went. I think saying that this house isn't the one I grew up in and deciding to burn it down because that is a way of letting go of your past memories, of not letting them control you. I mean, this goes back to Apparitions and Candlelight. Burn your bridges to a past that has been lost. This has been lost. There's no connection between him and this land, him and this building anymore. Burn it. This was alluded to and foreshadowed 9 songs ago. But why did he burn himself with it? Unless I'm totally misreading something here. But I still don't understand the ending then, when he finally acknowledges, if he didn't burn himself, and I misread that, he acknowledges that this is not his childhood home, he's moving past his memories, and then eerie, creepy, dark music I don't get it. So I really love everything in this album, even if it's not my usual stuff. But I do need a little bit of help here understanding this track. I thought I had a pretty good read on the lyrics up till here, and I don't quite get these. 3 hours, 12 minutes. Those are my thoughts on Kardashev's Beyond the Past. Nope, that's the name of this track. Kardashev's Liminal Rite. Let me know what you thought of this album, your thoughts, opinions, perspectives, if you enjoyed it, any of that stuff down in the comments. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree, which takes you to this menu right here. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. As I had mentioned, the vocalist here also does reaction videos. If you want to go check out Cardivox Academy, you can also check out this band, Kardashev. I'll put both of those links in the description if you want to check out more of this stuff. But go ahead and show them some love. And yeah, that wraps it up. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Early morning, my time for the patrons when we do our live stream. Evening, my time for everyone else when I try to get it up on time for everyone to watch. Which I did a good job last week because it was pre-blocked, which means I could immediately download it and start working on it for the VOD. But otherwise, I have to wait for YouTube to process it, which has taken 26 hours at most. So that's why sometimes it doesn't come out Sunday night like I planned. Alright, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.